We all have stories, every single one of us. From the highest of the high to the lowest of the low, we all have stories. Exploring the world for the greatest stories of all time.
Hello and welcome. You're listening to the Aron O'Dowd Show.
The Aron O'Dowd Show. Our soul is the screen upon which we project our dreams. What's your story?
Hello and welcome on the Aron O'Dowd Show. We have another amazing guest as always to share the soul lens. If you're watching on any of the platforms, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment because it helps get the show to the awesome people. Today's guest is Sandra Dee Robinson, from actress to speaker to charisma coach. Hello, welcome to the show, Sandra. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm good, Aaron. Thanks. How are you?
Fantastic. Tell us about when you discovered the camera, acting, and so on.
Oh, gosh. My first career started when I was 11. I know there's people rolling their eyes going, oh my gosh, she's going back to the age of 11. But that's true. Actually, I went, I had a photographer that spotted me and with his encouragement went into the local, and fortunately, a good, reputable modeling agency. And so she started to put me in front of the camera doing little things. I think my first ad that I ever did was me with a Muppet on my hand for a local drugstore. I mean, yeah, it went back that far. But then I went into regional commercials and things. I grew up in Pittsburgh, so I didn't grow up with any connection to the industry whatsoever. But ever since I was a kid, I somehow thought that I would end up being an actress. And so I just sort of, it's that naivete mixed with extreme focus because I didn't know anything else. And it's a great lesson to look and realize that's really one way that you can make a quantum leap at any point in your life is to stay really focused. And I didn't have a plan B. So when I had the opportunity to meet a stage manager through that agent in Pittsburgh, I did. And he said, I think you got something, kid. Picture Joe Pesci. That's what my manager for all those years looked like. His name was Vincent. And so Vince said, can you get yourself up to New York? And so I did. I would take little tiny flights up for like pennies on the dollar compared to what we're paying now from Pittsburgh to New York. And I sleep on it's not what it sounds like, but I would sleep on his sofa in his office where nobody else was. And I would have to get up and tuck all my stuff behind the sofa before his clients came in for the day. And I'd be wandering around in between auditions. But that was actually the start of it. So that summer I had 5 screen tests and I booked my first job on a show called Another World. I kind of grew up on that show. So I did a lot of soap operas. That show, I played a character for all told 9 years, but I also did Another World, Sunset Beach, Bold and Beautiful, General Hospital, Days of Our Lives, The Bay. And then I did nighttime shows, guest starring on nighttime shows in between that. So I was very lucky that I was able to work in an industry where most of the people in the union do not. So I was very fortunate. That said, if people want to be an actor, I have to say that it is something that you need to have kind of a tough skin for. And if you don't have a tough skin in the beginning, if you want to hang in there, you will get one.
Wow. How did it feel getting your first gig?
Getting my first what?
Getting your first acting gig.
Terrifying and exciting. My first day on set, there was a strike. So much like we just had the actor strike and a writer strike not too long ago. They had a union strike, so the camera guys were not there. So just imagine you've got executives trying to run these. At the time, they were massive cameras, right? No matter what, even if they're small, there's an art to this. There's a skill to running and directing these things. And my first day was 23 hours long. My second day was 22 hours long. And I kept my shoes on, my high-heeled shoes on the whole time. And the other more seasoned actors are looking at me like, what is wrong with this girl? And I said, I'm just happy to be here. I will suffer through any pain, any lack of sleep, just so I can be here. And that was very memorable for my first day on the set.
At the age of 13, you heard your mom say something to your father. Tell us about that.
Yeah, you pulling that from our book, aren't you? 'Cause I don't share that story. I haven't shared that story anywhere except for, and I'll give it a little plug. There you go. The Hard Work or Success book that both you and I were in. So my chapter, yes, it starts with that moment of, and it was not easy for me to write that, but it starts with the moment where I could hear my mother almost deliberately loud enough saying to my father, "Do you realize how much more money we have if it wasn't for her?" And a few other things. But that one particular thing stuck with me, that I was a burden. Children were a burden. My mother was a very interesting individual in that her brain was wired, literally wired differently than about 95% of people on the planet. And I was not going to have that warm, wonderful motherly experience that's on all the Mother's Day cards. So it was always challenging for me on Mother's Day to find a card, because I wanted to do the thing and send her the card and send her a gift for Mother's Day. And all the cards were so warm and wonderful. You're so supportive. I didn't have that. And I know I'm not the only person that didn't have that from a parent or even both, but my father was supportive the best that he could be. My mother, I still think, did the best that she could with what she had been given that she couldn't really feel emotion, she couldn't feel love, she didn't have a lot of the same human experience that we have. So, given that, I was always provided for. I always had food. I always had the things that I needed. So, overall, I was I consider myself kind of lucky. It wasn't until I went into some of the later work that I've done in my career where I was learning about trauma that I realized that everybody has trauma. It's either big T or little t. And a lot of my tea came from my mother, came from that woman. And which doesn't mean that it's something that if anybody's listening, it doesn't mean that if that something like that has happened to you, that you have to own that. It doesn't belong to you. The words don't belong to you. And I just think it's really important that people get that. It took me a while to realize that those words, that I wasn't worthy of being alive, that I wasn't worthy of being on the planet, I never should have been. All of those things that were said over me were not true at all.
How did it impact you in your career?
Oh, that's a whole book right there. I think the choice of career, interestingly enough, probably was fed by a desire to be validated and seen. And when I first was in school and went to my first play, I mean, to be in the first play, when you're in elementary school, everybody's in the play. There's no auditioning. Everybody is just something in the school play. So I think I was Mrs. Santa Claus. I remember this. And I remember getting so into it because my mother didn't play with me. So my imagination, which grew to incredible, colorful existence, was what I went into when they said, "You're Mrs. Claus." And so I just dove into it because that's what I did when I was alone all the time, playing in the backyard, playing with myself, talking to the animals. That's kind of what I did. So I just did that in public. And I remember getting accolades for that. And that little moment had me go, "Oh, wait, you mean I can do more of this? This is where I can get," and it continued. And so where I got rewarded and validated, felt validated, I wanted more of that. So it became the safe place for me to become someone else. It wasn't safe for me to be by myself. It wasn't safe for me to be me, but it was easy for me to go and dive into an alternative reality. And then when I got paid for it, it was all that much better. The interesting thing is, I don't think I was ever meant to stay there. I don't think that career was ever going to be something that would take me to the Oscars or anything like that. But it was very good for me at the time. As I started to do more work on myself, I realized that I kind of liked being me. That took a long time, but I did like being me, and the need to escape became less. I had more of a desire to help other people and be others focused as opposed to just doing what I was doing as an actor. And there is some bonus to that. I mean, you have a platform. I think everybody has a platform, though. You don't necessarily have to be on a TV show or a podcast. to have a platform. Everybody has a platform at some level that they can use to push forward things that are important to them. And so I had the opportunity to do that when I was an actor. I brought attention to some wildlife causes and animal sanctuaries that rescued animals of all different types and sizes and species. And that was really fun for me. So that's the kind of thing that I used my platform for. I could have done more had I stayed in it. But I think at some point I learned about coaching and helping other people and speaking and reaching more people with a message. And that's what pulled me more away from the acting.
What is your mission here on this earth to do?
To reveal God's great design. So even when I was a kid, I'd be coming in with bugs and flowers. And my neighbors, my dad say, "Isn't this amazing?" And I would look at this thing, whatever it was that came from nature. And I'm still doing the same thing. I'm doing it with my nature-based retreats. I'm showing the beauty that is God's design in people. So it's kind of what I've been programmed to do since I was a kid. And that's what I encourage people to do whenever I'm working with them. It's like, what is the thing that you have been doing since you were itty bitty? And that's been my thing.
As the successful actress you were, was nature your safe place?
Yes, it always was. In fact, my first job was in New York City, and I guess it was a great apartment, but you have to understand that I came from the country. So I would look out my bedroom window and just see rolling hills of farmland and greenery, and it was Western Pennsylvania, and it was expansive at the time. Now, where my childhood home was, it's kind of built up with a subdivision behind it. But at the time, it was just wide open spaces. And that's where I used to go and walk around. And that was my experience. And so when at 18, I moved to New York City, I got this supposedly great apartment. It was a railroad apartment, which meant you came in the front door. It seemed like it was about 12 feet wide through the whole thing. And it just went straight back to a window and a fire escape, which I called my balcony. I put a plant out there and I would hang out there because beneath my fire escape, there was a tree. I went from looking at the expansive fields behind my house to staring at the tree and watching the pigeons. And I managed to find that as my nature retreat whenever I would get home from work. I also wasn't too far away from Central Park. And I think Central Park saves the sanity of a lot of people that live in New York City. For me, it was a great time to be there. I'm glad that I lived in New York City, but I moved out of the city itself within about 6 or 7 months. It was not my rhythm. My body rhythm does not really match with the intensity of New York City. For some people are really comfortable in there. I am not. So I ended up moving out towards Brooklyn, which is where our actual studio was. So I moved to a little place that was on the water there in Brooklyn, and then kind of stayed out in that area for all the years that I was on that show.
Why were you in New York?
For Another World, for my first job.
Wow, that kind of build you up as an actress in some way?
I think trial by fire would be the way I could say that I got built up. I didn't know a dang thing when I got signed up for the show. In fact, I was so fresh off the truck from Pennsylvania that I showed up in New York City for my auditions wearing a white skirt with white granny boots, which there is a casting director that I'm still friends with who gave me my first audition and my first screen test. He still is casting director for General Hospital. And if I ever run into him, he will quite often say, "Do you remember that outfit that you used to wear?" Because nobody goes to New York City in a white skirt with white shoes. I mean, that was just insane. I looked so out of place. And that was it. That was as crazy as the idea was for me to be there wearing white. It was just as crazy that this girl from Pittsburgh that had never done anything but regional commercials is now in a national show in a lead role. And I'm sure that some of my co-stars were a little bit miffed by that as well, because I was working with people that were theater trained, Shakespeare trained, and I had read Shakespeare in middle school, but I never done anything like that. I wasn't a theater girl. I just kind of popped in because I had the right look at the time that I guess people were looking for, and I was really dedicated to making it work. So I learned my lines and I stood in my place and I did things I was supposed to do. I did not come in with any great skill as an actress, though. Not at all. Not at all.
And what made you so special as an actress?
I don't know that I was special. I would say, because I look at my husband was a stuntman. He's just now retired, but he was a stuntman for over 35 years in the industry, working with some of the top directors, producers, and actors in the industry. And you can look at that piece of Hollywood and say, what made you so successful? And the thing that we have in common, and that the people that we have worked with that have been successful, the thing that we all have in common, whether they're actors, directors, producers, stunt people, I can say is that we try hard to get along well with others. We end up building a group of friends or associates in the industry that are supportive, that look out for you. And that's the one thing I say, if somebody wants to go and be an actor, make sure that you have support around you, because it can be brutal. It is brutal. I was talked about in third person more times than I can tell you when I went to an audition. I'd go in to see an agent and immediately they wouldn't address me. They'd talk about me in third person, about my physical attributes, good, bad, ugly, whatever, as if I was just a piece of meat standing there. And I have had clients that have been supermodels, and it's the same thing. So there's a lot of brutality in an industry that is based on how you look. So I think the most important thing that keeps people working consistently, there's talent that's required for sure. I didn't have a huge amount of that. I was never going to be an Academy Award winning actress. I just don't see that. It wasn't my goal anyway. My goal was just to be employed. And I managed that. I managed to have great people around me. I managed to have, as my husband has, been called back for the same directors, the same producers over and over and over again. Working with some of the same people indicates that they liked working with me. So that, I think, breeds success in any industry that you're in. It doesn't have to be acting or Hollywood. I think that if you are a person that tries well to build those healthy relationships, and I actually got 2 jobs because, this was actually said to me because I worked well with difficult people. Now, that was told to me after I said yes to the jobs. So, because I show up on day 1 and I'm working with another difficult person, and I'm like, are you kidding me? And for me, it became kind of a thing. It became kind of a challenge for me to find the lovely in the unlovable at that moment, because the 2 people that I'm thinking of were very hard to get along with, and it was causing a lot of discord on the set. And that's what happens when you have an organization, a company, a division of a company, and the head person is a little bit, whether it's going to be angry, self-centered, aggressive, whatever that person is, that's going to filter down through all of the energies of the people below. There's going to be a lack of emotional safety. I know that that's a really cool buzzword now. It didn't mean much. It wasn't even in existence when I was doing my soaps, but it was still what people were looking for. You want to feel safe at work. You want to feel like somebody's got your back, that you're not constantly looking over your shoulder. And so, interestingly enough, I had a great time with both the people that were supposedly very difficult, and ended up really liking my time on both of those shows. So I hope that was like a really long-winded answer to your question, which started with something I don't remember. It was like, what made me successful? I don't know.
It's okay. And as an actress and as a woman, your looks are what counts. How does that feel to be in that environment?
I kind of alluded to that. It is difficult. I can't really sugarcoat that. To be talked about in third person, and to sit so often I would sit in a makeup room with these absolutely stunning women and men as they're getting their makeup done, and they're pinching their nose and they're pulling their face back, imagining what kind of surgery would help them look better. And they're already stunning and gorgeous. So there's definitely a sense of, I don't even know what to say. Sometimes it goes into desperation to try to keep youthful, to keep wrinkle-free, to keep attractive. And what does attractive really mean? Every audition that you go to, they'll be looking for something else. It can be, oh, she's too tall. Oh, she's too short. Nothing I can do about that. Usually I was too tall. I'm 5'7", and a lot of times I would be too tall because the actors were smaller than I was. And I'd be working with a guy that would be 5'7", which means that I would look too large on camera next to him. These are things I can't do anything about. But the things you feel like you can do, you might become a little obsessive on. Like I said, the people sitting in front of the mirrors and tucking their face back. And there's really, in reality, there's no reason to do that. None. I think that gorgeous is gorgeous. And there are a few actors that do look rather wholesome and themselves, and we love them for it. And I wish that that wasn't part of the experience, but it's a little toxic at times. I'm glad that I went through it because I think it did make me a little tougher. And I hope I can talk some people through it that are dealing with that kind of feedback. I have worked with artists and actors before that have got that kind of thing. And like I said, I worked with gorgeous models. These people were like, these women would walk in a room and your jaw would drop. And they've been insulted in ways and words that you can't even imagine. So it's that thick skin that has to be built up a little bit.
I may be wrong or not, but is it true that you were on Time magazine with Frank Sinatra? Is that correct?
I think my former co-star Joe Barbara said something about that. There must have been an article in Time magazine where he and I were in a picture next to Frank Sinatra. I never met Frank Sinatra, so I don't think that's possible.
I was thinking that,
No, never met
him. What was that pinnacle moment in your career that you thought, wow, I treasured that?
You talking about the acting career?
I'm talking about, in the acting career.
Wow. In retrospect, it's going to come back to relationships, and it's not going to be what most people would think. It wasn't, hey, the show's doing great. We're in great numbers. Hey, I have so many people that showed up for me that we needed the National Guard to keep the crowds away. That was cool because I was then looking for validation, right? I think I was 18 years old and we had an event in Canada. Our show was extremely popular there. The crowd showed up en masse to meet us. And I'd only been on the show for about 6 months. So the character was super, super popular. And we were worried that people were going to be crushed on the stage that were coming up to see us. And it was exciting. And at the same time, that was not a highlight that comes to mind first. That was, in a way, the initial, oh, there's a validation I was looking for. How crazy is that? It's empty. But in the beginning, that was, wow, what have I gotten into? That was that aha moment, like, holy crap, I've said yes to this. And now where is this going to go from here? It was very exciting. It was scary. I was concerned for people's safety. But in retrospect, after all is said and done, the real highlight was one of those people that I said was difficult to work with had been disrupting an entire cast. And I'm going to be very careful how I say this because I don't want to say who it was. And I'll tell you why in the end. It ended up being very different than people expected. The person was in threat of being fired. There was discussion. And I later realized that's where the attitude was coming from. The aggressiveness was coming from a fear of being fired. But when I walked in and introduced myself in the makeup room, that person, that actor, started talking about me in third person as if I wasn't there, which is really the most insulting thing that you can do to a human being, is to act like they're not actually existing. So I thought, wow, all right. There was no rehearsal. The person would not rehearse the scenes with me. It was a show that was a one take only. If an actor messed up and you had to do 2 takes, you were kind of called into the principal's office, if you know what I mean. So there was a lot of pressure to get the lines right. Because we didn't run them, some of the lines on the other actors' side did not come through correctly. So I not only had to learn my lines, I had to learn their lines as well. At the end of the first day, which went rather harshly, the producer that hired me for the third show I worked with him on, comes out and says, how'd it go? And I leaned over and I go, is this person like that every day? And his answer was, yes, but you can handle that, right? And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to do this every day. It ended up that day after day, I made it a commitment to find something, as I said, something lovely in this, at that time, very unlovable person who was making so many people angry. It was just incredible, because at the end of my time there, this individual was actually wonderful. Wonderful. In fact, my husband went back and spent a day working on the show and said, this is long after I had left it. And he said, hey, my wife used to be on the show. And who was your wife? Oh my goodness. This actor gathered everybody for a photo because this is Sandy's husband. Sandy was great. Let's take a picture for Sandy. You never have any idea that our relationship started with that person in such a bad space. By the time that I left that show, that person was a very different human. Not just in my eyes. I think that there was a sense of safety that was not in existence, interestingly enough, and I'm not saying that I had everything to do with the way that they looked at the world, but I think that there was something that changed while I was there, in part maybe because when I was seen as a threat to that person and they realized that I was not, we actually created a healthy relationship. I think that helped ease everybody's tension on the set, because that individual was no longer acting out. So in a way, I can look at that. I learned so much from that. There was one other. Let me share one other with you super quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
I didn't get a chance to do a lot of sitcoms because my resume was mostly drama. But there was a show that was #1 at the time called 2.5 Men. And I was called back again and again. I must have read for them 5-7 times. I mean, called back again and again, read in front of producers and directors, and thought, again, I'm getting closer to getting the job. I ended up getting the job, but it wasn't the role I read for. It was a teeny tiny role as a co-star. And I had been reading for guest stars, which is a bigger deal, a bigger paycheck, bigger opportunity, more chance to be seen. This was a tiny little role. I call it the bimbo at the door, because there were a lot of bimbos at the door on 2.5 Men. I said to my manager, Vince, same guy that I had seen back in Pittsburgh, I said, I don't want to take this. And his answer was, you don't say no to the #1 producer in television. So I was like, okay, because that time, and he's still very popular. At that time, he was the #1 producer of sitcoms. And so I went through this show in a small role. I learned so much about business. I love doing sitcoms anyway, because I'm not witty like that. So I always think, like, hopefully by osmosis, I will grab some sort of like funniness. My wit will increase by just hanging out with them, right? You're the combination of the 5 people you hang out with the most. So if I hang out for 10 days with super witty people, will I become witty? No, it didn't happen. I'm still the girl that goes home, like halfway home, I think of something that I should have said that would have been funny 15 minutes ago. So I didn't get that. But what I did get was a lot of lessons that I'd still share from the stage about how to bring new people in to your business. Chuck Lorre, the producer, would not give anybody, no matter how good their audition was, he would not give anybody a guest star role without giving them a small role first. Because he wanted to make sure that his well-run machine, and it was well-run, everybody worked together like clockwork. He wanted to make sure that nothing was going to mess that up. So he didn't trust anyone that was new to come in with a huge role and have that opportunity to disrupt anything. So every person that you saw that came back again and again on that show started in a little almost unforgettable role. It was just the way he did things. And I learned a lot about that. So if I hire somebody for my work, or to come and work with me, I give them a short list of things to do and see how they do. I give them a 30-day trial period to see how they do. I wouldn't just bring somebody in and load them up with a bunch of responsibility without actually seeing if they're going to be able to move with what is currently moving well.
Wow, that's an amazing lesson to learn, an amazing process.
Yeah, in such a funny way too, right?
It is. Were you searching to be seen, heard, and validated through your career?
Say that again. I just couldn't hear you real well.
No worries. Were you searching to be seen, heard, understood, and validated throughout your career?
Yes, I think that's why I chose that. career in the first place. Yes. And when it got to the point where I didn't need the exterior validation so much, or let's say I didn't need it from the people that were in that industry, then I was ready to move on to something else. I think I was starting to become a little more discerning. I think my need for validation, I think actually all people want to be seen, heard, and validated. And if they say they don't, then they're lying, because that's just a piece of human nature. That's part of our human journey, is that if we feel like we are meaningless, we will die. So to feel like you have some meaning, you have to be able to be seen, heard, validated in a way.
And when was that moment you realized time's up and I need to do something else?
I don't know if there was actually a moment. There was a series of moments, little steps, which, the way there's a method that I use when I work with people in the charisma coaching, confidence coaching, where I take them through, and this is in my first book, I take them through a series of memories that show a theme throughout their life of when they were the most successful, or that when they felt the most on top of the world. Like I call it the aha moments, the moments that they just were like, this is awesome. I want this moment to last forever. So I think as those moments came along as an adult, I started to realize that there was a pull towards something bigger than myself. Like one of those moments was when I was terrified to hold a microphone and speak in front of people as myself. Give me a character and I will hide behind that all day long. But to give me a microphone and say, just be yourself, I would shake, fall to pieces, lose my voice, run away, all of the above if I could. So to be able to, at some point, be handed the reins to a fundraiser, a celebrity fundraiser for an animal sanctuary that had an educational component to it, I realize now is setting me up completely for all the things that I am here to do. I'm here to teach, connect people to the beauty that is in God's design, and educate them on compassion and healthy relationships. And of course, there is the whole animal piece that I think we should respect what God has created. And so this little opportunity, I think I was probably 19, 20, and I did this for a couple of years, allowed me the strength because I felt a bigger sense of purpose. I was able to get celebrities on a school bus to come from New York City to New Jersey and raise funds that would support this little zoo, this little sanctuary for these animals. And there were lions, tigers, and bears, seriously, and all kinds of elephants. One elephant anyway, one unfortunate elephant, but they were animals that had nowhere else to go. And they ended up using placards to tell the story of each animal, and people would come in and learn about the animals and learn about compassion and empathy. And I felt so connected to this that it was the first time that I actually stepped out, made phone calls myself to people. Do you want to be involved in this? Never would I have initiated a conversation like that if it wasn't important to me. And then actually host that day, run the show. I would never have done that. But I think if you have something that is connected to your why, you will find the strength in order to do it. And that was probably one of the first steps.
Who would think a lady like you scared of the microphone,
I was terrified. I'm well into adulthood. So if I was doing something like infomercials were considered kind of the hush money. So you could go do an infomercial and get paid really, really well for hosting an infomercial for the day. And I would go in and read for one of these things, and I would just fall to pieces if the director said, just be yourself. And so it was bad. It was really bad. And I remember driving away from one of the most just embarrassing times that I could feel this sound of slapping. I was so nervous, and I realized that it was the fabric of my pants my knees were knocking so hard that the fabric of my pants was slapping back and forth like onto itself. And that's what I was listening to, like, oh my gosh, which of course just sent me into complete failure. And he said very, sweetly and pathetically, thank you so much. Like, you can go now. And I just remember driving home and thinking, I have to figure out what is quote unquote wrong with me, or I'm going to go into the countryside and just live in a house and make dream catchers for cats, because this is not what I should be doing here in front of the camera. And I ended up looking at performance coaches. I had something like 13 coaches within 7 years. And then I had all the self-improvement work. I had all the conferences that I was doing. I had NLP master certification. I had all kinds of modalities that I learned. And through it all, it wasn't performance that was going to save me. It was the interior work. It was understanding that the stuff that I had been believing about myself was not true, that I actually was here. The thing that was in my heart to do is what I should be doing. This sounds so almost cliche at this point, because we've been hearing people talk about this since the 80s, right?
Mhm.
But I had to really embody that. And I think there's still a lot of people that have to embody that. I work with people that are in their 60s that show up and are still listening to the voices in their head that are not their voices. That could be a parent, an ex-spouse, somebody that told them they weren't good enough, and they're still listening to that. And so I think that that's a big part for a lot of us in our human journey.
Is that when you discovered your confidence?
Also, I think confidence builds on itself, and confidence is not a feeling, which I think is so important. Mel Robbins brought this out, or maybe it was one of her guests, but it was something that I remember, like, that's true. Confidence is not a feeling. We associate it with being an emotion. It's not. Confidence is action. Confidence is moving forward even though you are terrified. So if that is the true meaning of confidence, then I think everything that I did that I was terrified to do made me more confident. Because if you get one thing done that you were afraid to do, then you're willing to do something more. And that is what a confident person is. A confident person will say, hey, I'm not really sure how to do that, but I'll give it a shot. That's confidence. That's getting into action.
There are two words that everyone loves hearing and hate hearing at the same time. And I think that, what you're doing is amazing, but where did the horses come?
So yes, for those that might be confused but I haven't looked at the bio, I work with horses in a confidence building or charisma presentation association here. With one of the pillars that how I work is actually putting people in a nature environment, nature-based training with horses. And so the horses are the coaches in this case, and I just facilitate. What happens is, well, I'll tell you how it started. Was my first horse that I owned, and I hate to say owned because we don't really own animals, they're given to us. The first one that I was caring for that was actually considered my own was difficult. And since I had this reputation for difficult people, I guess I manifested a difficult horse. She was difficult in some ways and absolutely wonderful in others. If she connected with you and you understood her, she would do anything for you. She would go anywhere, do anything. She was just magnificent, wonderfully trained. My trainer had her and had tried to use her for lessons, and she was a handful because she had two speeds, basically walk and, I was going to say something, blank to the wall. It's like, you got to do it. Nothing in between. And try as you might, the more I would pull back on the reins, is what I was told to do, pull back on the reins and stop her. She would just bite down on that bit and go even faster. And so it was terrifying. It was horrible. I didn't feel a connection with her. And eventually I learned what a healthy relationship is through her. She was the best life coach I ever had. And learning so much from that horse really made me understand, when I discovered that people were being healed from trauma through horses, I was completely intrigued. And so I investigated this, wasn't sure what it had to do with me at the time, but not too long after that, I ran into somebody that was a coach, a life coach with horses. And I was like, wait, what's this magical thing? And after a period of time, I watched her work with some of the folks in my community, realized that it was very beneficial. They loved it. But I also noticed things that the horse was telling her that she was missing. And I say that with respect, because she's the one that got me into this in the first place. But I had been studying animals since I was young because my mother didn't spend time with me. So I was outside. And my fascination with nature had me wondering, well, how do the birds communicate? How does a cat want me to communicate with it that's walking across my lawn? It's not my cat. So it was all foreign. But like, how does this dog that's walking by communicate? Like, how do the horses communicate? So I became very aware of body language and little nuances that the species would seem to use to interact. And I noticed that with horses. And of course, the more fascinated that I got with it, the more I studied the horses, the more I was around them, the more I started to pick up on these nuances. And this first person I worked with missed a lot of those. And so I thought, it turns out she didn't own horses, had never owned horses. So I actually did have something over her that she wasn't able to communicate with. And so I did go for the training, and I went through several different modalities because not all of them I thought were integrous. And so I found one that I thought really worked. It was based in science and just fascinating. And I started clumsily doing workshops and things with horses and people and just putting them together. And now I have wonderful co-facilitators. I have places all over the United States that I can use, and possibly even Ireland as well in the future. So we will have more of these going on for sure. That is really my heart work. I love to see what the horses and what nature can bring about in people, because I think it returns us to our most beautiful part of being human, which is to be present, compassionate, empathetic, and give ourselves and other people some grace to just be.
Is that what inspires you to do what you do?
Yes.
Wow. It just shows you the horse speaks. The horse speaks, and we sometimes don't know,
Yes. Yes, it's true. They have an amazing way of looking at the world that is in most ways very different from how we do. Their concern about being with you is, am I safe? And the correlation, when I have companies come in, I explain the correlation here as in we're talking about that term, emotional safety in the workplace. When you're with a horse, that's really what they're looking for. Am I safe? So if you are standing there pretending to be confident, to use that word, pretending to be in control, and yet inside you're terrified of this horse, you don't want to be there, you're self-conscious, you feel awful, but on the outside you're like, yeah, I'm good. And we've all postured like that at times. But you do that in front of a horse that's trying to figure out if they're safe with you, they're not going to want anything to do with you because you're not congruent. The way you're acting and your energy that you are actually giving off is not in alignment. It's not that they can hear your words, they don't speak your language, but that discord means that you are unsafe. So until you come into the present moment, which is where they live, and which is so hard for us as modern humans to be in, we just want to do, we want to go, we want to be constant in movement. And to be able to sit and do nothing is what we think is nothing, is sometimes the hardest thing on the planet to do. This, I'm telling you this from a girl that used to come rushing into yoga, okay? Screeching into yoga, slapping the mat down on the floor, and then assuming position and trying to breathe into peace. It doesn't work that way. It's a learned skill at this point to be able to be present and find peace. And on occasion, I've had people go through a workshop or a retreat with me and actually feel angry when I said, go sit by yourself for a moment. She's like, I can't stand it, is what one woman said to me. And I said, okay, your goal today is to find the peace in what you're feeling right now. Keep digging. Because as much as you get frustrated sitting still, that's how much you have to dig out to find out who you actually are at the core of all that. And it's usually a beautiful thing when they're able to sit, and anybody is able to sit quietly.
Oh yeah, it's a skill that we learn and can improve on. And with the horses you had, did they teach you to find peace?
Did they teach me to find peace? They might have tried, but I didn't get it in a group setting. I really didn't. I got a lot of other things from group training, but I didn't get it so much in a big group training. I got it more from my personal studies even books as common as Joe Dispenza's book, who talks about meditation, and books from Jay Shetty and monks and different, many different books that I have read on prayer, people that were able to find that peace. And I went, okay, if they can do it, and if there's actual, the Joe Dispenza approach was interesting for me because there was actually kind of a science approach to it. It's like, oh, so if I sit for this long and I use my brain this way, I can actually find that space where my body feels like it's just calm and at peace and I'm not even part of it. It was a really cool thing for me. So I think it's an individual process. Some people might do better with a group. I find for me, it was much more personal. It took much more willpower and dedication for me to make the time to sit and do nothing. And I have written articles on this ad nauseum, I feel like, because it's probably the hardest thing for me was to learn to sit quietly. So I have studied people like Winston Churchill. It was considered one of the most productive human beings on the planet at the time. And they said, how do you get so much done? And if you look up all the different things that Winston Churchill did, not just his reputation as a leader, but the creative side of him, the articles he wrote, the art that he created, we don't even understand. He had, like, how many humans were named Winston Churchill that he actually got all this stuff done? It's just amazing. And he said every day he would take time to essentially sit on his porch and do nothing, which seems totally counterproductive to what he was able to accomplish. But there are several people, even modern day, that talk about that say that they will sit for, whether it's 20 minutes, an hour. On occasion, one of the people I wrote about was, I think, 3 hours a day. It would sit and do nothing. Sit on the front porch and do nothing. It's just amazing to me. But I can understand why. So we get into that rat's race in our mind where we just go from thing to thing to thing, and we get this addiction to being busy, when being busy isn't necessarily being productive.
Sandra, what is your unique superpower?
Ooh, that's a big question.
Yeah.
You gotta warn me about those kind of questions. My unique superpower. Well, my husband will laugh because he's like, you talk to animals. And I do. And well, they talk to me. I don't talk to them as much as they. Anyway, yes, that does happen. That does happen. I did not harvest that, and I do not harvest that, but I've had several occasions that have been no other explanation, but that they have communicated with me. And so that's probably one of those things that just is, I think my unique superpower is that I just connect to the natural rhythms of things. If I can slow myself down in order to do that. So my unique superpower, I would say, is not something, and maybe it's the same with other people, it's not something that is available to me all the time. I have to make sure that I'm out of the way.
It's funny how we get out of our own way and then our superpower comes and then we rock people's worlds and their stages in some way, you know?
Yeah. I know you've done your share of that as well. And it is, when you look back, I look back and I wrote my book, the chapter in the book, Hard Work or Success. I mentioned quantum leaps, which just means at some point in our lives, we can make this leap from where we are or where we were to a place that nobody thought that you could ever be. And I know you've done that. That was always, I actually broadcasted I was coming on your show and mentioned that about you. So in order to do those quantum leaps, I think that's where we have to be. We've got to be at that point where we are out of our own way and our superpower can take the lead and we work through that energy. And that's when those things happen.
You talk about leadership a lot, Sandra. What does that definition mean for you?
Leadership, the way I look at it is, if somebody says, do you do leadership retreats? I say, yes, I do. That is what I label my retreats with the horses, leadership retreats. But I emphasize self-leadership above all, because that comes first. And then you can lead other people. like I mentioned before, with the organizations, the TV shows, the movies, that somebody at the top is unregulated emotionally, then it's going to be chaos. Emotionally, it's going to be an unsafe place. It's going to be disruption all the way down to the minions, if you want to call them that are running for the coffee. There's going to be that sense of ick that runs through everything. You're going to have distrust at every level. You're going to have people that want to leave. You will lose good talent because they don't feel safe. And so I think leadership that starts with self-leadership means that you learn to regulate yourself and check in with yourself so that your superpower has a clear way of using the space to lead, and you're not using the noise that is so disruptive to the emotional regulation in the first place. And that way you're leading with empathy and compassion, but you're not giving in. You're not a pushover. There's a line there where I say, yes, the horses teach leadership and compassion, and people go, oh, that's so soft. That's so woo. No, it's not. It's a gentle, but very strong way to lead because there's still boundaries that are there. It's much like good parenting, right? There's boundaries. There's also love and acceptance. So if you're leading in an organization, I think there has to be some understanding of compassion and empathy in the workplace without crossing a boundary into enabling and things like that. So those are the things that we learn whenever we're working with the horses. It's actually self-leadership first. There's a lot of leadership training out there that goes everything from Army leadership and people that have been Navy SEALs and all the way down to the kind of super soft work. I'm kind of in the middle with the way I look at leadership. I just think that healthy relationships is the basis for all.
What is the fingerprint that you would like to leave behind as a legacy?
Ooh, still forming. I think it's still forming. It's interesting that word legacy has been haunting me lately. I don't know why. It keeps popping up. So it's popping up with a couple of clients right now too. It's that word, I don't think of myself as somebody that needs a legacy, but there is something that I'd like to leave behind, maybe just the ripple effect of some of the work that I've done, and I may never know. I think some of the things that we do as coaches, as teachers, is we plant seeds, and it's not really my job to know if it ever reaps a harvest. But if I planted a seed somewhere, and even in the next generation, if it comes to fruition, then that's good for me. I just hope that I'm productive every day. If I can be, that's what makes me feel good, is to know that every day I'm doing something that I can create a ripple effect that will positively affect the planet.
With everything you do, what advice would you give your younger self?
Sorry, say that again. I couldn't hear you.
No worries. With everything you've done so far, what advice would you give your younger self?
The same advice. I was asked this a couple of times on podcasts, and one in particular, I was interviewed by one of the first mentors I had, and I gave him the answer that I think is still true today, which is don't believe what other people say about you.
Wow.
Do the work to realize who you actually are. What is your superpower, as you asked me? What is the gift that you've been getting? What is the theme of success that you've had throughout your life? What is that thing? And stand on that as your foundation, not what other people say. So I have memories, as a lot of people do, of being bullied in school, being bullied at home by my mother, not feeling that support. I could, as I did for a long time, believe that, but it doesn't serve me. I could also believe in the times that I was very well known, famous, to walk into a place and have somebody go, oh my gosh, I just so love you. They don't know me. Do I want to believe that everybody loves me because they recognize me from being on a TV show? I could walk around, get my head all big about that. And we know celebrities that get twisted with that kind of adoration, but that's not, and same with business. If you have somebody that's very big in business, they can get fed that same, and even addicted to that same feeling of adoration. And that's not who they are. You're not who you are, where you live. Let's put it like this. When I was in California, people would shake your hand and they would ask three things. What do you do? Where do you live? What do you drive? And all of that was to figure out how important are you going to be to my climb to success. So those three things mean nothing to me. They really don't mean anything. And creating a legacy, where you live, what you do, what you drive, has no real meaning. How you help others, how you serve others has all the meaning for me. That's how I look at it anyway.
Wow. Success is a big word we use. What does it mean for you?
See my answer to the above question.
That's a simple answer. And if someone asked you for advice, what would it be?
I come back to the same thing. You know, don't believe what other people say about you, whether it's good or whether it's bad. You can take it, say, okay, they said that came out of their mouth. It has no meaning. If it means that you lift yourself up from that, even if it was hurtful, lift yourself up from that moment of that conversation to like the 30,000 foot view and look at your life and who that person actually is within it. Does this conversation even matter? Chances are no. Doesn't matter. That person may not be with you for any more than an hour or maybe a couple of years out of your entire life. What they say to you doesn't actually matter. It's what you do with what they said to you. You can either own it or you can build on it. I'm not saying that if somebody says something to you that is true, if they say, oh, I don't know what I could come up with, that was very self-centered, or you're always late. Okay, there's something that I used to be. I used to be late all the time. And it wasn't intentionally hurtful. It was just because I get caught up in my stuff. And it wasn't until somebody let me know that it was hurtful that I went, oh gosh, well, that's not cool. So I took that feedback and I changed the way I was being. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't listen to what people say to you, but what they say about you as far as your value goes isn't something that you should build your own self-worth on.
I know you and I play in different networks and different communities, but if the audience wants to find more, where can they go?
Oh, that's easy. SandraDeeRobinson.com. And that's spelled out DEE. Like I think you have it on the screen here. So Sandra Dee, like from Greece, like from the play and the movie Grease. And you can also find me on social media. So I'm on Instagram and Facebook, on the Facebook. I'm on the Facebook. And as Coach Sandra Dee, my personal page is on there as well, but that's mostly just dog postings and things like that. So if you want to connect with me on Facebook, look for Coach Sandra Dee. And then, of course, YouTube, which this should be live streaming on as well. So, yeah.
What's the D for?
That actually was my birth name. So on my birth certificate is Sandra Dee Ann Ferguson is my actual name on my birth certificate. So Dee Ann, yeah. And then when I was in elementary school, I kept changing my name. I guess there was a piece of me that did want to be seen, so I kept changing how I spelled Sandy. It was Sandy, and then it was Sandie, and then it was Sandi, and then it was Sandra. Sandra Dee actually became what I was using to speak because people remembered it. They wouldn't remember my last name, but they'd remember Sandra Dee. And they'd sing the song from Grease, right? Look at me, I'm Sandra Dee, lousy with virginity. No, really, I hadn't heard that before. But they would sing that. And so I'm like, hey, people remember it. There's a song that goes with it. And now my husband, there's another song called Mrs. Robinson, right? Here's to you, Mrs. Robinson. So that's my husband's ringtone for me. So I have 2 songs.
Wow. Sandra Dee, it's been a blast, and thank you so much for coming onto the show and sharing your soul lens. It's been a blast.
Yeah, thank you so much, Aron. Great show. Congratulations on your show. Keep it going.
Will do. Thank you. If you want to catch out Sandra Dee, she's shared all her social networks, and make sure you like, subscribe, and comment, and let's stay tuned for another incredible conversation to share the souls of the world.
Thank you for listening to the Aron O'Dowd Show, where the world's best stories are told. If you like, please post a review or subscribe to the show. To find out more, contact us at aronodowd.com. That's ARONODOWD.com. We're always ready to share another magnificent tale from the world's best storytellers. So stay tuned and rock on.